around the end of 2024 and will be fully enforced 2 years later. So somewhere mid-2026, because there's always a sort of trial period of legislation. So not everything will be enforced immediately. The latest discussion was quite interesting. It's actually within the European Union, were two sides which were having a discussion on foundation models mainly. And the discussion was mainly about how to regulate them. So actually Germany and France, which are also actually having some interesting scale-ups in their midst, were more on regulating how it is used versus the stricted risk-based approach, which I will zoom into a bit later. And eventually they came to a compromise on December 6th last year. So that's actually the latest on that. So let's continue. So actually the EU regulatory framework will especially impact high-risk use cases. So actually the risk-based approach will classify AI use cases in 4 categories. So unacceptable risks. These are things that we as the EU will not accept. So that's mainly like biometrical screening or manipulation with AI models. So this will just be prohibited. And if you still do it, you will be fined. Then the high risk category is actually quite interesting. So these are mostly AI applications that can be high impact, but also have high risk. So this is an interesting category to solve because also the impact side is high. So if we can like properly implement this can have huge benefits. But if you do it wrong, there's also a risk involved. And then the limited and minimal risk ones are less regulated. So just pay attention to some specific things, but you're more freely in using it. So what I will do is zoom in a bit more into the high risk category because that is interesting, and you should pay attention. If your AI application is classified as high risks, then certainly make sure that you have some that you comply. So how do you create responsible high risk AI? Yeah, this is of course a bit tricky because both the AI regulation is still in development, and regulation will often not say how you should implement it, but often what you should do. So that's always an interpretation, and the interpretation is best validated if you have like existing legal cases where you can draw some conclusions from. But of course, I've been studying it together with my team, and we think that you should at least pay attention to the following things. So like, first of all, it's a risk-based approach. So create a risk management system. So maybe probably most of you have implemented things like ISO 27001. It's quite similar approach, but it actually follows the AI lifecycle. So you should make sure that you're in control of the risks. So that means that you should do some risk identification, make sure that you have measures implemented to reduce the risks, and also make sure that you test and monitor them so that you show that you're in control. In case it is a high risk application, it should also be registered in a central database in the EU. So also make sure that you follow that process. And in this system, pay attention to the following things that are actually having specific articles in the legislation. So first of all, it's about data governance. So most different in, for example, the privacy legislation is that you are, for example, able to use PII, but only use it, for example, for bias testing. So that's like slightly different things. So next to that, there are some things about technical documentation that you should be able to show that if you get an audit. There should be things like traceability in place so that you can show logs and monitoring. And I think the most interesting part is about the transparency and human oversight part. So actually, for high-risk applications, there should be technical measures to interpret the output, and humans should be able to oversee the process. So that's actually there were also already some articles in GDPR, but that's quite strict in this regulation. And as an outcome of like the discussion of the foundation models, Actually, the compromise was also that still on high-risk foundation models, there is a transparency obligation. So the thing with commercial models like ChatGPT, that's of course quite hard because they don't show any transparency in this whole system. So maybe interesting stuff for the panel discussion. At least as Deeploy, we believe that explainable AI can play an important role to comply with this regulation. So with explainable AI, you add a transparency layer of AI models, and you can create things like human AI feedback loops, which you can prove human oversight. So actually, our approach is to ensure responsible AI in production, so that it's not only about creating consultancy frameworks where you should like create all kind of steps and processes, but we believe that there are also technical measures possible and integrated in things like ML ops, where you're constantly updating and developing new models, but that you also pay attention to certain legal steps within that process without overloading your engineers with all kind of documentation. So make that very easy, integrated in their workflow. I think that's at least an important way, or at least a possible way to not see it only as a burden, but also as an opportunity. That's it. So if you want to know more about Deeploy, talk with me. But let's move on to the panel discussion, I would say.
So Karla,
all right. Yes, and we are right on time yet, still. So that's really great. So let me share my screen again.
Yep.
That would be this one. Yep. So we just had the pleasure to complete our crash course. So we are now all a bit up to speed with it. So let's move on to the panel. So the panel will consist today again of Tim, who has already introduced himself, and then Matthias Lein, who I am asking to introduce himself in a second, and then myself as the moderator and to ask the questions from the audience. So maybe Matthias, you would like to give us a quick introduction on yourself?
Of course. So hello, everybody. Welcome to this panel discussion. My name is Matthias. I come originally from an academic background with a lot of platform engineering in the high-performance compute area. And for about 5-6 years now, I've switched careers into the data science and AI track. Used to build a big development platform for autonomous driving. Did a lot of projects in financial services. And right now, I am the CTO of a data and AI consulting company that is AT based in Munich, although I am based out of Frankfurt. Back to you, Karla.
Okay, thanks a lot. Then maybe, Matthias, let me already start with the first question, especially targeted towards you. Like, since you're working in consulting, you're obviously seeing a huge variety of projects. So I'm wondering, how is the EU AI Act already affecting the projects that you're doing? Are you already taking it into consideration, or is this still something for the future?
No, our customers are certainly concerned about it. I mean, especially in financial services, you've got regulations like VAIT and BAIT. So these kind of industries are used to taking regulation into account, and they've certainly got it on their radar. So we've already hosted a couple of webinars in our company just because the demand is so high. Most companies have it on their radar, but this especially applies to the bigger ones. Small to medium enterprises, I think, are facing a risk here as well, but they haven't really realized what's coming for them yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so is there already like some very common demand that these larger companies have towards the AI Act, like a common request?
I mean, yeah, of course, they want concrete advice, which is difficult to give. As Tim pointed out, I mean, the regulation itself is not finished yet. We used to think that the AI Act will be finalized at some stage in February. Now that the latest draft has leaked, it looks like it might be delayed a little bit further. But we do have this period after the AI Act has been finalized, right? So with the EU regulations, there's always this vacatio legis period of 2 years. And that's because the regulation needs to be fleshed out, like Tim pointed out. So after the trilogue has finished, so that is after Parliament, Commission, and the Council have finalized the regulation, what usually happens next is that some standardization body actually works out what the rules are going to be. So that could be an ISO regulation, it could be something European like Zinreich, and they will develop the concrete standards that they need to be followed, right? And then usually the next step in the development of the actual rules would be that certification bodies, like for example TÜV, DECRA, PricewaterhouseCoopers, get certified to actually, put this into action. There is that 2-year period, and after the expiry of that 2-year period, we hope that we have all the actual certifications and the rules in place, so we know exactly what to do.
Okay, thanks for that. And then maybe now to open this question a bit more, is the AI Act, does it have, you already mentioned it, Tim, about the fundamental models and their pushback against the AI Act. So does the AI Act treat, like, let's say, model providers differently from, actual model consumers in some way?
Yeah, it's of course not completely now. So, but like, I'm not gonna repeat that all the time. But like from what I know at this point in time, like foundation models are a little bit different, of course, because you have one party that's actually making these foundation models. They should probably comply with like a risk-based approach. So add all the checks and balances in that are required by the regulation. But you also have a group of companies and people that are going to build on top of these foundation models. And that's actually like the newest added part to the discussion. So what are then your requirements? Can you just trust that like the foundation model is good and then you can just use it? Or do you also have to comply to the same standards? And what they currently, it's a bit of a different category, but you still should like be transparent on how you should use it. I think that's like the direction that I see the discussion going, but it's still ongoing, and it should at least be transparent how the model is used. And it's interesting to see, because there's of course a lot of commercial foundation model providers, and they are completely closed source, so you have no clue what is actually going on behind the scenes.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe to add to that, right? I think different companies are facing different risks here. So there are 2 areas that are singled out in the EU AI Act, and one are the providers of foundational models. The other area is remote biometric identification. I think Tim had that on his slide as well, right? So this is something that will be heavily regulated. And as a provider of foundational models, of course, these companies will be responsible for the performance of their model. But I think it is clear already that users of those foundational models will be responsible for the safety of the products that they built on top of that. I think this part is already clear.
Could this be sort of like a necessary loophole in the AI Act, if you want to call it that, in order to enable access to the European market for, let's say, US companies like OpenAI, since they probably wouldn't want to open up their models for the European regulation committees?
Yeah, how I see it is that actually it's a sort of blocker for entry at the moment. So currently they should open up in order to be active on the European market. So actually it's an opportunity. I see an opportunity for companies like Mistral AI that are actually completely open source. So if it's open source, actually like companies like mine can make these kind of models transparent. But OpenAI is for us like a no-go, because you can do things like prompt engineering to kind of filter the in and output, but like it's not real transparency, in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah, that is true. But it's an interesting point that you're raising. So you're saying it would rather reduce the access to the market, because the opposite view might be rather to say that the AI Act might stifle the innovation that could come out of Europe again, because they already like have this kind of limitations to all the work they are allowed to do or not. How do you see that?
I mean, there's a certain risk that the regulations within the AI Act turn out to be just as easily circumvented as the regulations in the GDPR, right? We have informed consent buttons on every web page around the world now, which is basically a reaction to GDPR. And most of these use dark patterns anyway, so there's nothing but or nothing like informed consent there. So we really need to see how the world develops once the AI Act is actually there. But I'm pretty sure that we will see reactions to it all around the world, albeit maybe in the same, dark pattern enabling way, like everybody reacted to GDPR.
Right. So that in the end, it's a toothless paper tiger that, yeah.
It is possible. I mean, I hope not, because, I mean, there are substantial fines associated with the AI Act, right? I mean, Tim had that slide there, how much percentage-wise of your annual revenue will go into EU coffers if you violate the AI Act. And I'm saying it again, right? This is also something that will affect the C-level and board of directors of all the companies personally, right? I mean, we have a situation that's very much comparable, like we had in the diesel scandal that affected the Volkswagen Group, right? I mean, no D&O insurance is going to save you if you're proven to have acted grossly negligent because you completely ignored the act. I mean, a violation might still result in a fine, but if you completely ignore the act, you're on the line personally here.
Well, understood. The comparison with the diesel scandal is an interesting analogy, which like maybe we can use as a segue to exactly move this question more towards the high-risk sectors that Tim has already mentioned in his crash course. So there he mentioned that for if you are operating in a high-risk sector, you have to get your company application, whatever it is, registered with the European Union in order to, well, mark yourself as part of this high risk. However, like that sounds to me like a pretty like self-responsible process. What happens if I'm, if I just like don't say I'm part of a certain high risk sector? Who else would assess that?
Yeah, you can of course take a risk here, but yeah, if someone discovers actually or like raises the question whether you really are not part of the like a high risk category. So it's actually the categories are quite clear. Maybe to start with that. So like if you're applying AI as a healthcare application or something, that's clear. You're high risk. And then still, of course, if you're a bit like in gray area, then it could be that I think it could be quite clear when you're neglecting like this whole process. So they described it in quite some detail. But yeah, then if you're really neglecting the process, then then the fine is is the way for people to take this seriously, I think.
Yeah, maybe just to clarify, right? I mean, the classification of the AI model doesn't depend on the industry you're working in, right? I mean, so your internal chatbot about, I don't know, your holiday regulations, even in the healthcare industry, is not going to be a high-risk application. And even if you're a manufacturer of screws, right? If you sort your I don't know, the incoming job applications in your HR department, those are likely going to be high-risk applications. So it's about the AI application, it's about the product and not the industry you're working in.
Right, but it still sounds like there is like a certain margin for uncertainty here. And could you guys see there some kind of a trickle-down effect or a chilling effect, I think it's called, that, you rather try to be on the safe side and you classify yourself as a high-risk company just, in order not to be later on classified by the authorities?
I think the useful term that Tim brought up earlier as well is the MLOps lifecycle. So as you start with an idea in the ideation phase, and then you cycle through your proof of concept and pilot implementation to the product, the scope of your application might change. So I think it will be really important to track the development of your ML product over that lifecycle, because as the scope of your product changes, so might the classification. I mean, you might start off with an idea that is clearly a high-risk application, and you might end up in a low-risk application just because your internal governments decided that you can't go a certain way. But of course, it could easily be the other way around. So I think close monitoring and documentation along the development path is really of paramount importance here.
Okay. So
And I think maybe to add to that, the traditional, at least from the interviews that I did in the market, traditional risk management is not really used to this lifecycle workflow.
Absolutely.
So it's often that you just do a risk assessment, then you build the product, and then you've done the risk assessment in the past. But actually, the idea of a lifecycle is that it's continuous. So, like things like model drift can happen. That means that you have to adjust your application again. So also risk and compliance people have to rethink the way that they work, because this is like an ongoing thing, and that's super important. And that's also a bit of education that we have to do towards the risk management community. So you see things popping up like AI GRC, and there are conferences about it, but this mindset is not there yet, in my opinion.
Yeah, maybe as a concrete example in terms of model drift, right? Because Tim just mentioned it. I mean, you might discover down the line in a low-risk application that you have inadvertently built bias into your system, and you're actually using personalized information, which you never intended to. As soon as you discover that, you're on the hook there, and you need to take steps to remedy this.
Okay. So what would you advise to your fellow CTOs in other small and medium-sized industries? How should they prepare themselves for the upcoming AI Act?
I can start off. So I would not wait till the last moment. I would at least take like the topics that I think are already part of like the responsible AI like movement that we try to be part of. There are like a lot of best practices that you can already learn from. So if you adopt those, you are already like making huge step in the right direction. So and you can already start with that, and just like pay like a natural like interest, at least if AI is important for you, towards the regulation. But you will be updated anyway, because it's in the news all the time and on LinkedIn. But or talk to me in the community. But I think at least don't wait till like the last moment, because you can also learn from the GDPR regulation that then there's a big chaos going on. So if you're already quite prepared before that, then you should be good to go.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, right? So company directors and C-level executives are responsible under the Act to provide an environment that enables the company to follow the rules of the AI Act, right? So right now is the time to put those strategy and governance rules and regulations in your organization into place to actually enable that, so you can react quickly once the rules come out. This would be really important. And to highlight that maybe in a different context again, I mean, we used to discover as IT providers shadow IT in companies all the time. But of course, times have moved on, and now shadow AI and shadow ML applications also exist, right? These also fall under the regulations of the EU AI Act, right? So you don't want to be surprised by some sort of tool that somebody has developed and is using it on their own. So it'd be really important to catalog and take stock of all the AI and ML tools that are active in your company.
Okay. But do you expect? But how do you expect these, especially the shadow AI, is very difficult to detect, right? By not only the authorities, but also by the companies themselves. So this is now like coming down to responsibility of the single developer, so that like, we have to raise the awareness, like in basically the whole workforce.
Yeah, you kind of have to, right? I mean, you'll never stop a rogue developer completely. But I mean, putting the tools in place and the company culture to enable actually the management of all those tools that are out in the wild. And there are management tools. I mean, I might just place our product here. Casebase.ai is a use case management tool that sort of guides you through the life cycle of an ML and AI use case. And we do have a self-assessment in terms of the risks towards the AI Act built into that, right? Rolling that out across the company not only helps you guard against the risks and dangers of the AI Act, but it also helps you foster the cross-pollination and enables synergies between companies and maybe not between companies, but between different departments within the company, right? Because one disadvantage of shadow IT is that every department in your company develops the same solution because one of the central systems isn't working. So it is always in your own interest to track what everybody is developing. I mean, the reason for shadow IT is not because people want to build their own products. The reason is because it's not provided by central instances, like, for example, your IT department. And the same is true for ML and AI products. So you should start cataloging now just to enable everybody to work together on those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I was also looking at some of the questions that came into the Q&A. So what you also see is that some specific sectors already have regulation on AI. So for example, within finance or within healthcare, you already have some guidelines out there. So they also already require you to have very strict things, and they probably also will start to align like in the near future. So actually for customers that we're working on right now, we most of the time look at like specific finance regulations, then implement it according to these standards, and then actually you're also way in like the regulations that are in the AI Act. So that's also an approach you can follow. But
Right.
actually, we're also educating regulators.
Now,
That's also interesting. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we talked a lot about, education, assessments, responsibility of the single person, but also responsibility of and an understanding of the leadership of the company on the topic, right? So there's probably like a lot of awareness that will also needs to happen from, well, probably more like the technical departments onto the C-level of many companies, in case they are a bit further away from the core industry of IT, I guess. How do you see that? Let's say you're not on the C-level, but how would you like, what would you recommend to raise awareness with your leadership team, in case they are not yet aware yet of the AI Act?
I think one of the most important aspects is always that to make sure that the process is actually well defined. If you're working on your own and things like rights and responsibilities, or for example, a simple model of role-based access to that model, or defining the scope of your AI model use are signs that you're not actually working in an environment that is set up to follow the AI Act. If you're working in an organization like that, you should probably make that known to management.
And what indeed, it's super multidisciplinary, right? This regulation. So eventually like there are multiple departments that really have to work in sync to make this work. What I actually experience is that the AI Act is quite well known with C-level executives, and that they actually, because it's very strategic topic for their organization. So they have certain bottlenecks in the organization, and they see AI really as a way to solve it. But often the blocker is in how do we implement it? How can we comply with regulations? So it's actually that they are quite actively looking for solutions, but that it is indeed quite a big shift in the way that they want to implement it, and they lack like specific knowledge that we are sharing in this panel discussion to really get started. And sometimes like there are other priorities, so the AI Act could be like the trigger to really start doing it, and then like our advice is, don't start like till 2026, start now, so that you actually are prepared.
Yeah. Given the current state of the legislation, and we know it can still change, but do you have the feeling it will actually provide enough certainty for the industry, or do you really think it will leave way too many questions open?
Yeah, in my opinion, I actually have been in favor of at least some regulation in the AI market. So I've worked in it like all my career, and I saw so many dangerous situations that I think it's good that we set a sort of standard on what we expect in the EU. I think that's very healthy. I think it's kind of as expected. So I'm not a legal expert, but of course, as an engineer, I want to see how should I do this, but that's of course never in regulation. So for us, it's still an interpretation on, okay, like we do a sort of best effort of how you can solve this. And of course, there's room for interpretation there. But I think if you already show a sort of best effort on these specific topics, then you're already good on your way. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, I think after the act itself has passed, there will be lots of open questions. I think the next logical step is then the standardization by a standardization body. So once we've got an ISO standard to follow, a lot of these still open questions will have been answered. Of course, the devil is in the details there. But what I see as an even bigger problem is that right now the AI Act doesn't seem to be very well aligned with other sectorial regulations like banking, like or general the finance sector, like the healthcare sector. And I'm not quite convinced yet that there will be no contradicting requirements in these sectorial regulations. And hammering these out and determining which ones take precedence over others will take some time. And I think we're going to see probably court cases coming our way that clarify the rules in that case.
Mm-hmm. So do you like see in the future that the AI Act will get a lot of national flavors because of that? You know, that like the German interpretation of it will be different than the Italian one, for example? Or
I mean,
is
it
it
is
like more
regulation, so it doesn't need national ratification or national legislation to come into effect. So the law stands by itself, which I think in vast terms already prevents local flavors. But of course, enforcement is still a different question. So we might see, just like in privacy law, for example, that Ireland enforces the law very differently from, for example, how Germany does it. That is still possible.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I think you don't want local flavors, at least. That let's not do that. I think indeed what you Matthias, what you shared about the finance regulation, at least what I see in the Netherlands is that it is actually quite well aligned. So the DNB in the Netherlands actually aligns there. It's not super complicated yet what they have, but like the basics are quite well aligned. The medical is different. So there's like the medical device regulation, which is like we as a tool already like encounter sometimes like the medical device regulation. So yeah, that's still a bit less mature, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Now maybe let me ask a bit more of a cheeky question at that point. Like I would like to point out the relationship between the European Union and Switzerland. And I'm asking this since I'm here in Zurich in Switzerland. Obviously, Switzerland will not participate in the EU AI Act, but will sort of like as this island in the middle of Europe, sort of like, you know, can be this kind of a loophole for companies in Europe to rather, you know, get some of their stuff then maybe just hosted in Switzerland, since they're still like part of the EFTA, so they're still part of the economic market, right? But not part of the legislative market. Do you see that as a risk for misuse?
You're really looking for loopholes, right, Karla? Yeah, I hope not, at least. So I think there's a good reason why we want to regulate these things, because they involve risks. So if you're really looking for a loophole, yeah, maybe there is a way. But I would make your life easier. Just like create responsible AI applications. I think that's the best thing for humanity in the long run.
Yeah, I think there's also a strong financial incentive for Swiss companies to actually follow the law or follow European laws. And we've seen the great normative force that GDPR applied all over the world. And I think the EU AI Act will be very similar in its implementation. But yeah, I would expect that some Swiss company is probably going to test the waters in terms of hosting or offering services to EU citizens. But I don't see a great scope, because I think in the end it will be just cheaper to have one operating model across the globe.
and maybe we are the world champion making regulation. So as Europe, so you will probably also see that other countries will adopt very similar things.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, we can also just hope that this will also give us a lot of ethical guidelines, obviously. But we have now talked a lot about regulation and have neglected a little bit the other side of this discussion of the AI Act, which is the explainability of the models and the applications that you actually build. Now, when it comes to explainable models, right, there's always sort of 2 layers, right? You can just go down the neural network layer, and people will tell you that it's basically impossible to trace back how the decision was made in such a big model, and that might be all nice and fine. However, you have the chance to ask models for their reasonings, for example. So do you see a middle ground where there's at least some kind of proactive explaining of the models required to give us certainty in that field?
Yeah, I certainly have strong opinions about this topic. So I think what you will see, and you also see that within European universities, is that they have trouble competing on the model level with American universities to create large language models, but a lot of them are focused on for example, explainability and responsible use of AI and bias detection. And you will see massive improvements also in the way that we can actually explain the internals of the model. So that's where we are also actively contributing to. I think what you mentioned, asking questions differently, that's not a way to add transparency. So things like prompt engineering techniques, it's if you just explain it in plain language, what you are actually doing, you can use as many fancy words as you want. It's a very random approach to add transparency. I see a middle ground, as you mentioned, but then it's actually in the development of transparency techniques. So you use the model internals, or you use surrogate models, which are a sort of abstraction layer on top of the model internal, so that you use that to aggregate your insights on how the model functions, and then you add context to the output that the model delivers, as a goal to be able for humans to interpret how the model actually comes to a conclusion. So that's for me transparency, not any prompt engineering or hacking or whatever. So, and that actually means that if the model is completely black box and commercial, that it's impossible to make it transparent.
I completely agree with Tim here. I think explainable AI is still underestimated as a discipline, and we will see very well explainable models in the future, especially triggered by the AI Act, as the development of these XAI models and methods is spurred on as well. And I mean, neural networks are not even exempt from this, right? I mean, for example, in image recognition, you've got class activation maps that show you exactly which parts of an image actually triggered the classification, which I think is a great use case already of XAI. Local surrogate models have already mentioned by Tim, right? We've got Shapley values. So I think there's a lot of tooling that we can actually use. But I think for certain high-risk use cases, there will always be that one final distance that you can't make with XAI models, and then I'm afraid you won't be able to use machine learning and AI for that particular use case. But I think the number of those use cases and areas will get smaller and smaller with time.
Yeah. So how I see it is indeed that for creating some first discovering if it is actually of value for the product that you're developing, it's of course fine to use everything that's out there, but when it becomes very interesting, immediately start thinking about how can we make this transparent in the long run, so that because it is super important in the regulation. So if you start thinking about it once your whole product is finished and then the regulation kicks in, that's super late, and you have to do everything differently, and that may mean that the performance of the model itself is a bit less at this point in time. Yeah, that's it. That's a result of that. But yeah, you have the ability to add transparency.
So do we see already something on the horizon that will satisfy these requirements?
I think so. Yeah. So yeah, it's like very cutting edge stuff going on, but it's not super. So there are like loads of techniques that that are able. For example, there's lots of interesting discussions on attention in these models. So if you look at the transformer framework, attention is an important part of it. And there's a whole discussion in the research community, like, yeah, attention actually shows exactly what the model is doing, but it's very low level. So if you look at the 7 billion llama model, it already has so many layers. So it has like 30 layers. We all have attentions, matrices, and like if you're, we experiment with this in practice, and if you are like an AI expert, yeah, actually this attention already has like super valuable information that is for them, they are able to interpret that. But as an average human being, we cannot interpret it. It's too much information. It's like still sometimes subjective. But yeah, you already see that it is possible. So there will be like a lot of developments going on. What I personally believe in is that like if you have too much information, the things that you do is start building models. So like surrogate models on explainability. I think that's a direction that I strongly believe in. But already start like playing with these attention values, or that already gives you a lot of like insights in how these models function. So just like making it part of your development cycle, your machine learning life cycle, I think that's already important to take into account.
Yeah, just to loop back what Tim said right at the beginning, right? Modeling your solution with the AI Act in mind right from the beginning, I think is going to be key here, right? I mean, it's just like building your marketing model with a GDPR violation in mind, right? I mean, if you need to know deeply personal information about your customers just so your marketing algorithm works, then you've violated, not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law immediately. And you need to build ML and AI solutions with the AI Act in mind right from the beginning. If you build something out that works and you then try to retrofit explainable AI into it, that might not even be possible anymore.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot for these very detailed answers from both of you. I would like to now have a look at the questions that have been raised by the audience. And so what do we have here? Unfortunately, there were no votes made on the questions, so they are all sort of like have the same importance. So I will simply start at the top and asking the question by Till regarding human oversight. Is there guidance how to implement it? Models like GPT have random components to it, and is it not clear how they get to their decisions? How do we make this transparent?
Yeah, interesting question, I would say. So yeah, human oversight on models like GPT are very limited. So the only thing that you can do is like let the output of the model be checked by a human. But yeah, that doesn't give any context on how the model actually gave that answer. So what we just discussed, like the explainable AI part, how we use explainable AI in like real real processes, that you use explainability actually to give additional context to model output, so that actually the human in the loop here is able to assess the output of the model. That's at least how we believe that it could that you could have effective human oversight, because just letting a human look at the output of a model, it's not really like effective human oversight, because it is human oversight, but it's not effective. So in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, and this is how it's done today already. We've got customers that are classified as critical infrastructure in Germany, and they use recommender systems to improve their services all the time. But like I said, it's just a recommendation what they get from the algorithm, and the actual go or no-go decision is always made by a human. And this is best practice as of now, how to implement human oversight for that. And even without the EU AI Act, in certain areas of critical infrastructure, automation is just not allowed.
Okay. Then here's a different question. It's regarding IP law. Is there any clarity on IP law regarding the fact that the work done could potentially be far more autocomplete based by tools like Copilot? And the question is like, who owns the IP? Also for software capitalization, can we still claim work done if a certain percentage of the work has been actually done by a AI tool?
Yeah, interesting question. I guess I think what many of you are already using is like for images in your presentation, it's actually a solution for having like a license-free image. So I think at the moment it's not a problem, but in the future it can, of course, this discussion can circle back to us. Actually, currently, what is an interesting discussion, maybe I go a bit too off topic, so Matthias cut me off, but the IP that is in the models is actually more interesting. So there are like some interesting legal cases about from the New York Times, for example, to OpenAI. About what all the IP that goes into the model. So an outcome of that discussion could be that actually that the things that have been generated also have IP laws in it. So yeah, I think that's interesting discussion to keep an eye on. Yeah.
Completely agree with you, Hitam. And for those of us who've been playing with those image generation models, you will have realized that it's getting harder and harder to actually get corporate IP into your images, right? So a year ago or a year and a half ago, it would be very easy to ask for an image of, you know, someone that looked like you in the style of a big movie franchise. And these kind of prompts usually don't work anymore. I say companies like Nintendo or Disney have been very successful in making sure to put guardrails on these kinds of models, and we're going to see more and more of that. But the question that was asked here by the audience, I think it was John. Yeah, there is no cutoff value right now. I mean, if GitHub Copilot wrote 60% of your code, it's not quite clear if you can still claim copyright on it. And that's a very interesting question. The other question is, can anybody prove that your code was indeed written by the Copilot and not yourself?
Mm-hmm. Do you think this could be mitigated simply by buying licenses for these kind of generative AI machines?
You effectively have to do that anyway, right? I mean, none of them are completely free.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even with the GitHub Copilot, there are ethical questions, right? I mean, it has been trained on open source software, which is governed by open source licenses. So the question is there, should the output of, for example, GitHub Copilot also always adhere to those open source licenses? It's a completely open question right now.
Yeah, and what will be a more important discussion is if the amount, if we like focus on code here, if the amount of code generated by AI increases on GitHub, then Copilot will be getting dramatically worse because the AI will learn from AI, and that's like a doom scenario. So actually that also tells something about the importance of the humans in the loop here. So maybe circling back to the other discussion. So without us, yeah, AI is super bad.
Yes, that is true. I was actually, maybe I can find it. I recently saw a terminology on the degradation of AI models if you just train them with synthetic data. See if I can find it. But to maybe move on to the next question, which is like, so if we end up using only third parties, like for example, Google Vertex AI, then is it safe to assume that they will be covered by the EU regulations?
Yeah, that really depends how you use them, right? I mean, if you use, for example, ChatGPT just out of the box to sort of summarize documents and write draft emails, you'll be safe because their OpenAI carries the entire risk. If, however, you use some sort of GPT API provided by OpenAI to build your own machine learning or AI product on top, you will be liable within the realms of the EU AI Act. So it's really who is providing the product there. So OpenAI in that case is on the hook for their API, but you're still liable for your product.
Yeah. Yeah, that circles back to the foundation model discussion, I think. So
Right. But can we then conclude that as an end user, you're pretty much not under the risk of running into violations with the AI Act by simply asking controversial questions to, let's say, ChatGPT?
That is an interesting question. So, yeah, eventually, I think there is a liability with the model provider. But yeah, if you just use it for yourself, then indeed there's not a risk for you involved. But if you're like building products that you expose your weird questions to users, then there is a risk. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not building a controversial Twitter bot out of it. Okay, then we have a few more anonymous questions. If companies are responsible for models that are used, especially third-party models, are there any tools or references for assessing and understanding or even classifying the potential risk of these models?
Yes, of course. I mean, in broad strokes, we already know what is in the AI Act. And first of all, you need to classify yourself if you're going to be a low risk or a high risk application. And there are self-assessment questionnaires that you can follow to determine your personal risk. But I think in the end, I mean, and obviously we've said this a couple of times, you should start right now to think about this. But in the end, we will see what the exact rules are once we've got the AI Act and once we've got the standardization on top of it.
Yeah. One useful tip that I actually got at a conference, in a GRC conference, was that you can actually use some of the risk assessments from the GDPR, also related to the machine learning topic, as a starting point. So there are already there is quite some overlap probably, and the formatting is quite similar. So the structure of the law. The biggest difference is, I think, the life cycle that we covered is quite different, but I thought that was quite a useful tip because that's implemented. There are already risk assessments for it, so you can learn a lot from what's out there.
Great. Okay. Then we have basically covered all the questions. And also, if I have a look at the time, we are coming very much to a close for today. So I don't know, Tim, Matthias, is there like some final words you would like to give to the audience as a wrap?
Sure. I mean, we've had that call to action a couple of times. Start now. Try to read some background information. There's a lot floating in the internet, a lot from the civil society. A lot of bloggers are going on about this. I mean, academics like Philipp Hacke, for example, from the European University Viadrina in Frankfurt, so the other Frankfurt, not where I'm based at, always writes on it. Get yourself some information and start working on it now.
Yep. I fully agree with that. So as an addition, so if you're interested in this topic and building AI, I encourage you also to look into the whole responsible AI movement. So there are quite some useful resources like the Ethical AI database that do quite a nice market mapping as well. And it will give you additional context on what's happening in the whole AI market. And that actually helps you to start now. So just by being responsible.
Perfect. Great. Thanks for these closing statements. I guess we all have to now get our act together. So thanks everybody for joining today. And I hope everybody had a great time and learned something new. Thanks, Matthias and Tim, for your time and all your helpful insights. And especially thanks to Chaya for organizing everything in the name of the Alpha List. So again, have a great evening and see you next time.
Thanks everybody for your interest. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Cool.
And you too have a good evening as well.
You too. Really, thanks again for your time. That was really cool.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks.
Appreciate it.
Have a good one, everybody. Bye.
Have a nice evening.
Bye-bye.